All right, hello and welcome to the fifth session of our Amicitia Clarinet Extravaganza weekend. My name is Diane Barger, and I am professor of clarinet at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Joining me in this endeavor is my Amicitia duo partner and professor of clarinet at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, Denise Gainey.
Hello.
Denise and I are really excited to offer this forum designed especially for band directors or future music educators. Denise worked as a middle school band director in Florida before she pursued her career in higher education, so she has so many great tips to offer from the perspective as a fine clarinet pedagogue as well as a former band director. I'll just do my best to give some tips as well.
You give wonderful information, so I'm excited to do this. So whether you're just starting out or you're a seasoned band director looking to get some tips to help your clarinet section, this session is for you. So please make sure you post your questions in the chat or comment area of Facebook Live, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can throughout the session. No question is silly. Please don't hesitate to ask, all right? So let's start at the very beginning, like I like to say as a huge Julie Andrews fan. We're going to talk about assembly of the instrument. I also teach class woodwinds, and I have since I was a graduate teaching fellow at the University of North Texas. And I find this is one of the most overlooked but most important things because so many students easily damage their instrument in the assembly process and end up, when they're all excited to play, not having an instrument and becoming behavior problems in the classroom, getting frustrated and getting behind or quitting. So it's very important to develop a consistent routine as we teach them how to assemble the instrument and keep checking them, because just telling them once or twice is not good enough. So I'm going to not actually assemble my clarinet, but I'm going to kind of talk through, and it's really important to be specific about which hand is holding what and where. And this is what I like to do, starting with the bell in the left hand. And I'm going to take the right hand and lay the clarinet in my palm and wrap my fingers around with my thumb up. So I'm not grabbing around these side keys. Very important. You don't want to bend key work, right? Once those two pieces are together, after checking corks, I should have said that, cork grease is in vogue, Mr. Opperman used to say. Make sure that especially new clarinets, the corks have not compressed yet, and so you want to make sure that you're using something to keep, and we can talk about specifics of cork grease and stuff a little bit later, but making sure that there's not too much on, but enough that you're not hearing when they're going together, right? All right, so once I've done that, I'm going to move my hand down to the bottom of the instrument, so I'm holding the bell and the part of the lower joint, but not grabbing key work. And now my hand goes to the right hand over the tone holes, so I'm raising the bridge key, an important part, right?
You meant the left hand, right?
Yes. Did I say right hand? Sorry. Left hand. Oh, my other left. And my thumb is straight up, so that, again, these trill keys are what get bent so often and cause the instrument to squeak and make all sorts of interesting noise, leaking air. So keep the thumb straight up. So I'm holding this way. I'm not going to hurt a thing, but I can have a good grip on the instrument. It's also, if you ever look at a cork, you can see around, you're not going to be able to see it here, but you'll be able to see the direction that the cork is wrapped. And if possible, teach your students to turn in that direction so they're not going against the grain of the cork. And that also gives it a longer lifespan. All right. So once I've got I'm always holding the joint below the one I'm connecting. Now I've got my left hand. I'm going to take the barrel in my right, put it on, right? And it doesn't matter, like you don't have to line up the insignia or anything, but I will say with professional clarinets, it does matter. It will make a difference. With your beginners, you're not going to hear a difference in the sound, but there's a better resonance when barrels or bells are turned in a certain direction. So just watch for that. All right, so once I have the barrel, now I'm going to hold it in my left hand, and I'm going to take the mouthpiece in my right and put the mouthpiece on without ligature or reed. You don't want to grab onto a ligature ever. So once I've got that on, I'm going to line up the facing and the table of the mouthpiece, the flat part, with the register key. And it's a register key, not an octave key. So remember that. We're the weird ones in the band. We don't have an octave key. All right, so once I've done that, I'm going to take the reed, and you want to make sure that both ends, if you're playing cane reeds, are wet. So you want to let them soak the reed in their mouth. They can also use, the little medicine bottle of water, but just doing it with saliva is fine. But let it get soaked on this side, then turn it around and let the butt of the reed get wet as well, because the entire cane vibrates. A lot of students don't know that. They may know that it vibrates, but they don't know that you have to wet the bottom part of the reed too for the best sound. So you want to place carefully the reed on the table of the mouthpiece, and the tip of the reed should be just seriously a hair below the tip of the mouthpiece. So it shouldn't be protruding over. A lot of times students will look back at it on the front side, and that's, you want to look from the front where the reed is on the mouthpiece and carefully line it up. And I would tell them to line up from side to side, never touching the heart of the reed, because Mr. Oppenheim used to always say you can break the spine of the reed that way. So adjusting the reed from side to side, getting them to be really careful with the tip, because reeds are expensive and it's so easy to break the tip of the reed. All right. Now, once the reed is in place, they're holding it with their thumb, and they're going to gently take the ligature and tip it back and over. So you never want to slide. A lot of students will put the ligature first and then slide the reed. You never want to slide a reed on a mouthpiece because you can damage the facing of it. So place, then ligature. And the ligature, the bottom part of the ligature should go right where the bark begins on the reed. All right, and then nice firm. I like reverse ligatures the best. Most of your students will get what I call the thrifty buck 50s with their new clarinets, little, the silver ones with the screws on the right, and those get easily bent out of shape, and so just once they know how to take care of their equipment, consider going to a reverse ligature. It's just better to have the pressure on the back of the mouthpiece rather than onto the reed itself. All right.
Sometimes, I'm sorry, I'm just going to break in right here. Sometimes you'll have a student who will try to take a regular ligature and make it inverted, and then the screws are on the wrong side, and then it doesn't work. So I have seen that many, many times. So just watch out for that. Generally, the screws are always on the right unless you have a ligature like Denise and I, where it's just in the back of the mouthpiece. So.
Right. Yeah. So that, in a nutshell is assembly. The biggest thing is repetition, careful repetition, checking to make sure that they're not grabbing onto key work, that they're treating it like I had a teacher once who said the clarinet's like a mechanized piece of jewelry. You want to be very careful with it. It's expensive. Take good care of it. So, before they start playing better and better equipment, they really need to know from the very start how to take care of it. And if they do that, their clarinet will stay in great working order for a long time to come, right?
Yeah, think about it in that systematic approach that Denise just talked about. The right hand goes on the bottom joint. So that's the hand that holds this when you're putting the bell on. The left hand is on the top joint, and that's the hand that holds the top joint when you put it together. So
yeah, so it makes sense. That's good.
So there you go. Awesome. And then taking it apart. You want to talk about taking it apart?
Or do you want to do that, or do you want me to?
Well, basically, it's just the opposite of how you. Now, first of all, yes, you take the reed, the ligature off, and the mouthpiece off, and then you make sure you run a swab through it. Right. And we always suggest, and you'll hear contrasting views of this, but we always suggest that you drop the swab through the bell. Okay. Yes. Because and when you drop hang on. You like that effect? Okay. When you drop the swab through, you want to make sure, and we're going to talk about equipment a little bit later, but this is more of a silk swab, not one of those chamois swabs. You want to make sure that you have it extended, including this, because if it goes in the instrument like this, it's bound to get stuck. So just carefully put that through the swab, through the instrument. And then basically, I actually take it apart from the bell and then the middle, but you just have to take the mouthpiece off. We don't want to pull the swab through the mouthpiece. We'll talk about that a little bit more later.
Yeah, and make sure there are no knots. We do a knot check to make sure there are no knots in the swab, anything that could catch on the register tube, which we'll just talk about a little bit later as well. So now that the horn is assembled, what happens next? And we want to talk about forming a great embouchure and voicing. And I love the way Diane describes embouchure. So could you start with that, Diane?
Sure. And the best way for them, even though they have the instrument together, they're going to be so excited to play. But then you say, nope. You just have them take this much off because it's easier to hold. You don't have to worry about hand position, fingers over the tone holes correctly. And then they can just learn how to make a sound this way. You want to make sure you have the simplest explanation for a beginner, because if you're, and then you can add to it. I mean, I have a really complicated way, a very detailed way, and I'll try not to talk about it that way. But you often read in beginning method books, roll the bottom lip over your bottom teeth. Well, what does that mean? Because I find doing that, students will often curl way too much lower lip over their teeth. So I like to say, spread the lower lip across the front of the teeth, and you can all do that with me. And when you do that, you actually get just a little bit of that lower lip on the top of the teeth and on the top of the bottom teeth. That's all you need. You just don't want this, because when you do too much, it's really hard then to point that chin. And when you think of rolling or spreading the lower lip across the front of the teeth, it also starts to engage those muscles here to help point the chin. Okay. Then you insert the mouthpiece, reed wedge, okay, with your hand, okay. And then your top lip gently touches the top of the mouthpiece. Now, this is what, and I'm going to try to get as close as I can to the camera so you can see. You want to make sure that this upper lip is not just done, you don't just want to plop it onto the top of the mouthpiece. You want to actually engage the upper lip and have it close also to the front of the teeth here, very much like what you did with the bottom lip, okay? And that helps engage that upper lip, and you're not using the wet inside of the upper lip when you're getting that kind of poochiness, but you're using more of the red part of the upper lip to press down on that top of the mouthpiece. Okay, and you notice I can talk to you like this, and my sides of my mouth are free to relax, to be able to breathe. Okay, and so that's what you want. You want engagement here, here, everything here going forward and down to create the seal. And the lips form a rubber band seal around the mouthpiece, but again, the sides relax just a little bit so you can breathe and intake the air, okay? You also want to, when you're talking about embouchure, you do want to talk about tongue placement in the mouth, because the tongue is the foil with which the air speed goes through the mouthpiece, okay? And we want, as clarinet players, fast, cool airstream. We don't want a low tongue placement. So rather than thinking, ah, we want to blow that cooler airstream, he, and sometimes you can just have the students put their hand in front of their mouth, blow ha, and then it feels warm, and then blow he. And that's nice and cool and fast. And then you just put that all together and you just make that sound. You don't even have to have them use the tongue. Okay. Denise, you want to add some to that?
It just in talking about, again, we're with beginners, and it's great for as teachers, we need to know that really detailed approach to teaching, because we want to know what exactly should be happening. But when they're first starting, and they've not touched the instrument before, try to think of things that they can relate to. So it's like an inverted whistle. You can think, when you're trying to talk about the bottom lip, it's like they're putting chapstick on their bottom lip. Think of something funny or anything that's going to help them to be aware of what you're trying to get them to do. And then it's a whole different game when they try to do that, engage the embouchure and try to blow through the clarinet as well. They're going to lose that. So you have to keep going back and reminding them. I would say about the bottom lip, you want to know that, as you do know, all of our students are different. You're going to have people with very thin lips, very full lips, and so it may look different for each student. But the idea that Diane's saying is important, that we don't want to do what I call Hoover, like a vacuum cleaner, where the whole bottom lip sucks over. So you want to make sure that it's just a little bit, enough to cushion. Too much, you're going to hear the reed be very dampened and sound closed off. Too little, you're going to get squeaky, squawky sounds. So kind of, it's good to know what sounds happen when they're doing things incorrectly. So
another good analogy, you were talking about the whistle, which I think is great. I find that sometimes my students can't make a whistle. So another analogy is like thinking about trying to drink a really thick milkshake through a straw.
That's a good one too. Yeah. So that embouchure is so important, because that impacts everything they do. And as teachers, it's hard to teach everything correctly with so many people in the room, but the more accurately you can teach them from the beginning, remember, they're going to remember that over everything else. So you either have to go back and reteach it, or make sure you're telling them and reinforcing it correctly from the beginning. And believe me, I know it's hard, having had big band programs with so many students, but do the best you can to look at each of them individually and watch that. And the firmness is important too, and something that you can do to check, if you're hearing that the sound is really spread and loose, and it's probably maybe not the tongue placement, can also be just that the bottom lip is too loose against the reed. So can make a big difference by just firming up there without biting. So, and I know Diane talks beautifully about keeping space in the jaw, not clamping down, which is real common for beginners. They're on it, so then they're thinking too much up and down. So getting them to think pressing down with that top lip really helps. And if something I do in class woodwinds and with my beginners is just make sure you tell them ahead of time, but when they're playing, tell them I'm going to move your clarinet and just very gently move the barrel from side to side and tell them, can you firm on, so that they see that their teeth, they're not sliding across the mouthpiece, but they've got a nice, good, firm embouchure without biting the reed. That's the tricky part.
Yeah, that's the hard part, is that you're going to see your students wanting to, when you say something like firm up the embouchure, yeah, they're going to want to clamp down with the jaw. And what we want is that fixed, stable opening of the jaw, like it's this wedge that, and so here's the jaw, here's my opening of my mouth, and here's the mouthpiece, and we just want the mouthpiece to be inserted into that wedge without the mouth going har on top of that. Okay. Yeah. So, and that's something to actually, even for beginners, to practice forming the embouchure first before the clarinet comes anywhere near your mouth, rather than, okay, insert, then I'm going to change, then I'm going to fix the embouchure, because that is a recipe for biting.
Yeah.
So having them, and sometimes I'll even have them make the embouchure, blow a little bit of air. I'll go back to just this again. So I'm starting to blow, I have the opening, and I'm just inserting that mouthpiece, and boom, once I get it in there enough for the reed to vibrate, and again, I'm not changing that at all. That's a really good concept to start with even the beginners.
It is, because you'll see that their second, third, fourth notes might sound good, but their first note is typically not good because they're forming the embouchure as they start the sound. And they've got to do the opposite. They've got to form the embouchure, then insert the clarinet, then play, right? So really important to remember that, because then they'll sound good from the first note on. You'll have beautiful beginnings of sound, release of sound, rather than squeeze and then they start to open up. So if you look at the side of your clarinets that your students playing, and you'll see when they start, the jaw actually physically opens up. That tells you they're doing that. It should look exactly the same from the time they begin the sound, rather than letting it kind of chomp down and then open up. So that will help a lot. All right, the next thing is kind of the mystery thing that many band directors don't know about, and you won't know unless you're a clarinet player, and it's the word voicing, which is our shape of our oral cavities. We play clarinet, and we are the weird ones in the band. We do things very differently from the brass players, and if you learn the secret, it's a huge, huge help. And I'll go ahead and start, and then Diane, you can talk about the way you adjust it. I think of three basic syllables that I use in different registers. So there is no exact place that I can tell you, but I'll tell you approximately what I think. From low E, our bottom note on our clarinet, to about C, I'm thinking ha. All right, so tongue is relaxed. That's the one place. That's why your beginners will sound really good in the beginning down the low register, because their tongue is already low. So once they get to about there, the tongue is going to raise to the word he. So ha, he. The tongue is arched. You should be able to feel the fat part of the back of your tongue against the inside of your back molars, right? The tip is down forward. And then the secret one that makes a huge, huge difference when they start to play toward the upper register, when I get to about G or A above the staff, that's in our clarion register, going up to the altissimo, or the high notes, the squeaky part, which everyone hates at the beginning, he changes to Hugh. So if you say he, Hugh, you'll feel that difference of that arch. You get an actual, like a U shape in the tongue. And why is this important? Because it impacts the speed of the air going through the clarinet, making it appropriate for the register that we're playing in. And Diane, you want to talk about how you?
Yeah, I mean, I generally avoid saying ha too much to my students, even though, yes, we're much more relaxed in the lower register. Mr. Marcellus, one of my teachers, used to say more of a heh. he, he, hu, for the three registers. Ha works as long as you don't overly open back here.
Right.
You don't want that because then you're not going to focus the sound. But I do like to tell, when I used to teach the skills class here, I would tell my students, make sure, when you're in front of the entire band and you're trying to get this warm sound and you're doing things like, then go to literally move to your clarinet section and go, but you guys, and then hiss at them like a cat, because sometimes those things that you're doing in the podium,
Mm-hmm.
which, my goodness, I respect all band directors. I wouldn't be able to do it. So I respect you all. But to help those clarinet players, you may have to just remind them, because if you start to hear this really fuzzy, unfocused sound, and they're playing with the Luke, I am your father kind of Darth Vader kind of air, they have to just be reminded that we've got to have that cooler, faster airstream. We have a pretty big bore to blow through, and that's why we need fast airstream. Unlike an oboe, they've got this tiny little hole, they've got always air to spare, right? We don't. We actually need that fast, cool airstream. The tongue, again, controls that airstream, and the embouchure then controls the reed. The jaw, don't let the jaw have anything to do with any of the above other than just being nice and set and stable.
Right.
The other thing is to find the proper angle for each student. And this, I think, sometimes is a marching band thing that happens, that if the students are made to hold out their instrument, sometimes that's not the best angle for clarinetists. And again, because of everyone's oral structure, their teeth structure, they're going to have a different look. Again, another one of my teachers, Frank Kowalski, held his instrument almost vertically to his body. It was amazing. That would not be comfortable for me. I couldn't get a sound, but he sounded like a dream. Others hold it a little bit further out. So I'm going to actually stand up and show you a little. I'll see if I can get in the screen. Okay. I do this little exercise, and maybe I'll do a side view where I'll just have a student play a particular note and sustain it, and then without moving the embouchure or the head, they're just going to move up until they can't get a sound, and then in until they can't get a sound, and then back out until they find what I call the sweet spot, where they get the most resonance. So you can do this on any note. I don't know if you could hear that on the recording.
Yeah.
Hear it? Yeah, you could hear the point at which when I got too far that, whoa, the sound spread, right? And then when I got a little too close, it got a little bright and a little stuffy. And then hopefully you heard that sweet spot. That is a great practice tool to have every single one of your beginning students do, your middle school students, your high school students do, to find that right angle.
Yeah, when they change mouthpieces, that can make a little difference as well. So if the mouthpiece has a different opening to it, so just have them check every once in a while, make sure they're getting their best resonance. I want to add one last thing about talking about voicing with beginners. It's going to be confusing at the beginning, so just say he. Just get them thinking that high tongue, and then as they start to expand their range, then you can. And as Diane said, so many of us grew up in band, and many of our band directors let's sing band, and they're thinking da 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 or la 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 la, and as they do that, they're learning that low placement. So I very much, same thing when I was a band director, turned to the clarinets, but you think he. Right, just make sure you get making that reminder. It makes a huge difference. You'll also know if they're playing very low, their intonation tends to be very flat. That can be another cause of it. If the bottom lip is not too loose, it's that their tongue is too low. So those are some things to be listening for. All right. Okay, someone asked us a question over here about the basic syllables. So I type, and Diane says he, he, hu.
So it's either ha, hey, ha, he, hu. And everybody just say it there in your own privacy. Ha, he, hu, or he, he, hu. So it's about the same. It's just, again, you don't want to overly open. I think playing the clarinet is so natural. You know, sometimes we don't make it that way, right? It's very similar, you know, in terms of the human voice, even how we breathe, all of those things, but we just don't overly like get in a mid yawn. That is way too open,
Yeah.
even in the Shalyamo register. So
Good. All right. And so if you see any, if we're missing anybody's questions, please we'll make sure and go back and catch them too. But thank you for asking. All right. So next, one of my favorite subjects, air. Air is so important, and students, that's the number one thing I'm sure that Diane will agree that we often have to address when we're teaching students, whether it's beginner level or college level. In my own playing, when things are not going right, it's because my air is not being used effectively. It always goes back to that. So air is the foundation. We are wind instruments, and air is so important. And we teach our brass players to play with really big air, but we don't often teach our wind players. We think, oh, this doesn't need much air at all. Well, it does. It takes a lot of air. It's a workout to play clarinet. And so I like to use the phrase, engage the cage. And I have to admit, I stole this from Tony Horton's P90X, but it works great for clarinet. And it's about how we think about our core and how we're using the air. It's that pushing down and out. So we're different from flute players. Flute players are much more vocal in how they breathe. They're going to keep things more relaxed. Clarinet players are very tight. So I'd like to use a couple of exercises to help students to think about using their air appropriately, and Diane has some great ones too. And I'll go ahead, I don't know if I can do this here, but I like to have students sit up in a chair without their back against the chair, and I'm in a rolling chair, so I don't know if I can do this at all, but I may end up shooting across the room, we'll see. But I have them play the low F with their feet flat on the floor. And when I give them the signal, I ask them to pull their legs straight out in front of them as they continue to play that low F to see if they hear a difference in the sound. So you can't see, but I was putting my legs, I really was. It's also, you know, I told them it's their abs of steel workout for clarinet. You can also do this by laying down on the floor and coming up, you know, and also standing on one leg, I call the flamingo. I can't go back like Diane can, my students. But and that one doesn't show them as much, but it's just another kind of cutesy way to get them to be aware of using their core as they play. And then one last band director trick that I like to do. And there are some great machines, like we could talk about the Air Revelator too, right? In a moment.
that Wesley Ferreira has, yeah.
Another cool thing. But what I do just in class woodwinds to make the students aware, I get a little square of paper and I have them go to the wall and get very close to it, form their embouchure, and try to just use a really solid stream of air, thinking about that pushing down and out, to hold that paper up. And it makes them aware of just, gosh, I've got to really push the air quickly. And then the tricky part is to try to keep the air focused as they slowly back away. And the trick is to see how long can you hold it up. And those, again, are just little tricks to make them aware of how to engage the cage, that pushing down and out. Super important.
And again, so when Denise said the word tight, I went, and so that there are two ways of thinking tight. What she meant, and she said it really well about that pushing down and out. She did not mean the lower abdominal muscles squeeze in.
Right.
No, not with clarinet. I think maybe, you know, some other instruments do that, but we're not like Tom Ridenour in his Music Educator's Guide for Teaching Clarinet talks about the toothpaste tube. So we don't use the toothpaste tube in terms of how we, you know, how we breathe and how we produce the air. So once we tank up, you know, think about the lower part of your torso and think about a toothpaste tube, how you squeeze from the bottom up. That's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is more of what an aerosol can is, this steady stream of air that from the lower abdominal area, it's that idea of pressing out and down. I tell my students almost like, you know, think you have the have some little person inside your lower abdominal wall who's literally pushing out against your lower abdominal area. And that's how you want to produce that air. Now, yes, as the air expels, there's going to be a little bit of relaxation, but you're not squeezing in. That's what's going to help you be able to play longer phrases on the instrument. But learning how to breathe also and how to intake the air is very difficult, I think, for the young student. Well, for any student, quite frankly. We see it at the college level that we have students that are breathing high. They're breathing like that, like they're saying, huh, but backwards. Okay. I think just a lot more relaxed. And sometimes I'll tell my students, pretend that your belly button actually is where the air is coming through. And that belly button expands. And it's that idea of you feel the expansion. If you had your hands on your lower abdominal area and the back of your hand on your back, you would feel this expansion. Okay. So I'm going to come back here again. This is another good exercise. I love the one that Denise does with the legs out, in terms of producing the air, but in terms of breathing, this is a fun little exercise and helps students learn where that proper place of breathing is. And so what they're going to do is they're going to slightly spread the legs so the instrument can come in. Oh, this is the wrong thing to work today with this. Okay, okay. And so they're going to start from this bent position. They're going to bend from the waist, and then they're going to breathe. And you want to actually hear the breath. Okay, not this. Okay. And then they should be feeling this expansion. And then you're going to have them start to blow one note, okay, or they could do a scale. And where they feel that expansion, as they start to raise their body back to standing position, they want to press down and out against where that expansion feels. Okay, let's see if I don't kill myself with my necklace. Let me take my necklace off. Sorry, guys. All about fashion. Okay. Okay, and that's just a really great exercise to help students learn how to breathe. Because let's face it, if you're choking and you're trying, someone's giving you the Heimlich maneuver, they're having you bend over so you can learn how to breathe. When you're choking, we can't breathe low. So that getting in that position actually really helps us learn how to breathe correctly. And it's a great practice tool. Denise, do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I would just say that expansion is not going to only be your belly pushing out as the air expels and your back expanding, but also from the sides. Your whole rib cage should feel like it's coming apart. So I tell students to feel like they have a balloon inside that's just equally expanding around. So as they take that air in, we have to learn to do it quickly, like, right? So Diane, you say a backward, ho, right? As we take that air in, so we can immediately get that amount of air that we need to be able to then quickly expel, pushing down and out through the instrument, right?
And then as soon as you expel the air, the tongue goes back into the proper position. So it's a...
Right. And the trick with this then is when students are trying to sustain notes, the air tends to drop at the end. Right. So with beginners, I tell them to think they get to long notes to crescendo through them, to think about keeping that airspeed moving all the way through so that they're getting in the habit of keeping the pressure all the way. Because what then happens when we start teaching them to play piano, what happens? They start to get a spread sound, it loses its focus and it's not clear anymore. They sound great at forte, but when they play piano, what happens, right? So the trick is the reed still has to vibrate the same frequency. So the air's got to keep that fast, that pushing down and out, especially when they're playing piano and they're playing softly. So they've got to practice doing, get them to do long tones or whole notes, very slowly, where they're starting as softly as they can, keeping that cage engaged, crescendo up, listening to the sound as good and focused. And then as they decrescendo, make them listen and be aware, when am I dropping the airstream? And it's got to stay consistent. So just less of it goes through the clarinet, but it's just as fast to be able to keep the reed vibrating. And that's the trickiest thing to teach beginners when we're trying to get them to learn how to support. They understand the forte, but they don't understand piano. So that first year, let them blow, let them get the concept of support before you try to start backing them off. And then you can, once they understand that, then you can start teaching them to back off while keeping a great sound.
And then realize that the reason that the students will lose that support, it's not just about, they let the airstream slow down because the tongue tends to retract in the mouth when we start playing piano. And then if you think about it, again, that tongue is the foil with which, it speeds up the air. And so if you're inside the mouth and the tongue retracts, up in the front of the mouth, that air speed starts to slow down, and that's what's going through the instrument. So as we play softer, we actually have to keep more mindful of keeping keeping the tongue high and focused forward. Don't let it curl back.
Right. So it's those two things working together, the pushing down and out, the engage the cage with that tongue placement, that voicing. And that's what leads to a great supported sound that will project and be beautiful, right? We hope that's the goal. All right. Great, Diane. Great. I love the way you talk about that. Hand position. And this is so crucial for every instrument, especially for woodwind players, because, and clarinetists, because we're dealing with holes that we have to cover. And flute players with open hole flutes will struggle with that too. If our hand position is not taught well from the beginning, it can really cripple our technique going forward and develop all sorts of hand problems and things, tension that your students will deal with for years to come. So no pressure or anything, but that's very important to make sure that we're teaching them that foundation, right? So Diane, do you want me to start or do you want to start?
Well, I mean, I'll start a little bit. I think the most important thing is to have the students understand first that it's the pad of the finger, not the tip of the finger, that covers the tone holes. And generally, we like to teach that they actually put the fingers over the tone holes first, okay? And then the right thumb is between 1 and 2 o'clock if you're looking at a clock, but that it's not way down here, okay? We should be able to just move forward to touch the bottom of that register key. I find that sometimes students are way too high or way too low, and then they have to jump up to touch that register key. Again, the thumb has a little bit of a curve, and all we do is move forward. You don't have to touch very much of this to open that register key. Okay?
Diane, can I add to that for a second?
Yeah.
The reason that thumb is often a problem in beginning band because the first notes they learn to play don't use that. And if you don't get behind them and really reinforce, I catch this in class woodwinds all the time. The students, I go behind them and up, their thumb is down, down low. And just if they think about the little tip of their thumb where all it has to do is press, and then they're in the right place. Otherwise, they're going to learn to jump up to it and they're going to squeak when they try to cross the break.
Yeah. Yeah. And and this is also something like when they're playing that open G, maybe that's the first note. It probably shouldn't be. It should probably be more like an E. But I find that oftentimes students will learn, I got to get the right, will learn when they're not using the thumb that they'll put it way down here on the clarinet. And then that becomes a habit when they come to college and I'm like, no. So there's always a home base for every single finger, and home base, if the thumb is not on the thumb hole, is just directly across from it. It does not help support the instrument. There's no need.
I tell students to think about there being a little piece of floss or something coming from that hole that's connected to their thumb and they can't go down or up. It's just got to stay right in that position.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So the same thing with the right hand, and the right hand is the one that usually, we see most of the problems because the students are thinking they have to hold the entire instrument with their right hand. So again, teach them first to actually put the fingers over these tone holes. And when I say over these tone holes, you do not want to see this. You don't want to see any black. You actually want to cover those rings. When I play, you don't see the rings. We don't want to see that, okay? Because boy, that's a recipe for squeaking, okay? We also don't want to do this. And you see that a lot, okay? So again, the pad of the fingers first. And then you move the thumb under the thumb hole wherever it feels best for every student. It's not a one size fits all because we have tiny hands, we have bigger hands, especially with young students, they're most likely going to have tiny hands. So, and I have a pretty big thumb rest. This is a Charles Bay thumb rest. I don't even think they're made anymore, but If I had a regular thumb rest, it would be maybe ever so slightly at the base of my nail. But it's more about right in between here. And that's just for my particular thumb. And then you don't have to do this. It's a little bit of an angle because again, all of these things are going to cause some major hand damage. Um, and just yeah.
Well, this is a great place to talk about thumb rest. And many beginning clarinets now come with adjustable thumb rests, thank goodness, because they might, where the old ones are when they're just stable, might be great for some people, but for many students, they're not going to work well and will end up causing a lot of hand problems as the years go by. So as you are able to adjust a student's thumb rest, if you have them hold their hand up and see where their thumb and naturally goes between their index and middle finger. And then as they turn their hand this way, that's where their thumb rest should be. All right. So that way they're holding the instrument and the weight, it's, you think about it, it's the heaviest instrument that doesn't traditionally use a neck strap. Many people do now, which is good because it helps to save that hand. But especially if they're holding it incorrectly at the wrong angle, they're going to end up with tendonitis, carpal tunnel and stuff as time goes by because we play so much technique as a woodwind player. So make sure you get that thumb rest in the correct place. And as they grow, that may change. So just keep checking, right? You can also get, if it's a traditional thumb rest and the student's having problems, it can be replaced. Take it to your local repair person and ask them to put on an adjustable thumb rest. So
yeah. And if I can just say, I just had a student this week who, when she did this, her thumb actually goes behind her index finger. And she had her adjustable thumb rest as high as it could possibly be, and it was still not the right place. So you can get those adjustable thumb rests moved by a responsible repair technician. So there's no need to play with pain.
Right. Life's too short, right?
Yeah.
So talking just specifics about where things go for band directors. Guide keys, I would say the importance of the pinkies. Mr. Opperman, my teacher, used to always say that was the foundation that kept us. You'll notice beginners many times will track or their fingers will follow as they go up the scale on an instrument. But if you get them to think about their pinkies resting on the low F key and the low E key, those are their guide keys. And if, with real beginners, I say, pretend like you have bubble gum on your fingers and they're sticking to the keys, or that you've got a magnet in your finger and it can't come very far. I mean, it doesn't have to stay on the key all the time. It needs to be very close to that, right? And then, as Diane said, just a nice arch in the fingers. We want to think about the clarinet is played from the knuckles down. We want to have just a natural extension from the shoulder to the arm to the wrist to the hand. So if they're arching their wrists up like that or anything, that's not good. They're going to have problems. So you want to make sure have them just let their hand come naturally to the side and naturally lift up to the instrument. And when they do that, they'll be in the correct position. So as they look down the clarinet with their right hand, they should see a big backward C, right? There's a slight arch up in the index finger, so it's ready to go to play trill keys, but the fingers are nice and relaxed. And as Diane, I love that she talks about not being able to see the rings, but you do want to see the bar. So you don't want them holding over, and that's another common thing. Your students' fingers will flatten out and go over the tone holes. Another recipe for a disaster with squeaking, because they're going to leak air. With the top hand, it's not a backward C. Like with saxophone, you'll see that. But with clarinet, we actually have kind of a V. I don't know. But if you look down the clarinet, you'll actually see more of that feel rather than that, right? So if they're a big open C there, they're going to be in the wrong position. Their index finger should always be wrapped around that A flat and A key, right? And then one last thing about this, watching that, many students learn to leap up to the A key. That's one of their early notes that they use. Try to get them to think of it being like a hinge so that they're on that F sharp, that first tone hole, and they're just rocking up so that they're touching the bottom of the teardrop key. They're not leaping up to the A key. I tell students to remember that what goes up must come down. So we want to have economy of motion, fingers close, but not too close to the instrument. That's another just as bad a problem as fingers flying away, because that impacts the sound as the air comes out and gets blocked by the fingers. So just comfortably close so that they are ready to get back where they need to be as their technique progresses and you give them more and more challenging music, they'll be able to do that, right? Diane, anything to add to that?
I would just say, and in terms of finger movement, we want, and I have a a fist, and I'm going to put my right hand over my hand here. Okay. That is the natural. You see that every finger has a little bit of a curve. Every single joint is slightly curved. Okay. And it's not a pulling up from the front of the finger, it's a pulling back motion, as if you're a little puppet and you have a string right here, and every digit moves like that. When you start, and then you just put that onto the instrument. Okay. And you notice that when I do that, my finger is, look how far away from the key it is. That's going to actually give me really good technique. Okay. I find that sometimes young students, because they're told keep the fingers close, they actually keep them too close. And if we hover too closely, it actually affects the pitch. And they're probably going to start to straighten their fingers and do, you know, incorrect things. So this idea of this pulling back motion, okay, and it's very controlled. You could, you know, pretend that you've got taffy, you know, and you're pulling taffy on and off a tone hole. Okay. You just don't want the finger to flare up and, you know, be like a rocket. Okay. And straighten out. You want to maintain that same finger curve. Same thing with the pinkies. The pinkies should not be extended and straight. We often see this in young students. To help support the clarinet, the pinky will go down here. Okay. So again, like Denise said, you know, the pinkies have the home base of the left E key, the right low F.
You'll see that a lot, like they're holding the clarinet. Yeah.
And all of that is just tension, tension, tension. And as soon as we have tension in one place of our body, we talked about embouchure before. If you're tight with the jaw, your are going to be tense. I mean, tension, and then your breathing is going to be tense. It's just it's a free fall. So we want to remain, you know, it's actually very natural to do this with your finger. And you could just you could practice putting your hand on a desk and practice this individual digit motion. The ring finger is going to be the hardest to move because it shares a tendon with the pinky, and especially in your non-dominant hand. You know, my left ring finger is much more difficult to raise as my right one. But you can practice that, and it's all about that. That's what helps the economy of motion, is if you don't see this. And you'll see some fantastic artists doing that, you know, to be expressive. Try not to, you know, let that be an influence on your young musicians. Okay.
And along with what Diane just showed you about practicing finger motion, you can also make them aware of the importance of keeping tension out of their hands by doing the same thing on their hand. Have them squeeze very tightly. You can do that with us and just squeeze and then try to move your fingers. It's kind of hard, right? But if they relax their fingers, then they can really easily move quickly. So it just kind of makes them aware. You'll notice when students play either really, really loudly, or sometimes super softly, they just get super tense and they start squeezing. So if you see that they are squeezing and they come at you and they have like the imprints of the tone holes in their fingers, that's too tight. They shouldn't see that, right? So think about them holding an egg or something gentle that they don't want to squeeze. But a lot of it goes to having that proper holding position, keeping fingers in place so they don't feel like they're going to lose control of the instrument. Because between here and their thumb, they're great, right? They're not going to drop the instrument if they're holding everything properly. So getting them that proper position, proper body position, and keeping the tension that we do use, that pushing down and out, in the right place and not letting it travel up to the hands, right? Tension anywhere in the body is going to end up in the hands and impact the technique. So I've had to fight this my whole life. I still do. So I really am conscious of it in my own playing, trying to work on it. And same thing with my students. Making them try to play things too fast, too soon is a great way to develop a lot of tension in their hands. So teaching them to practice things slowly as they develop their technique. And I know that's hard when we're trying to get ready for a concert or contest or something, but the best that you can, let them learn things slowly and relax so that they maintain that proper position as they gradually learn to play faster, and they'll be much better players for it technically, right?
I'm just going to add two more things. So again, where we normally see the issues beginning with the student is in the right hand, because they are tensing up because they're holding the clarinet. Remind them that they have another thumb. And while, yes, sometimes, we're playing a G, A, or an A flat, most of the time we have that thumb down, okay? And the idea of actually helping to distribute the weight of the instrument by pressing with the left thumb up and out against your upper teeth. That tip right there will help them immensely not feel like they're holding that instrument just with that right hand. It'll also help them not bite, but if they bite, that biting is going to be felt in that right thumb. Okay.
That's a great tool. And it's when they're trying to play up to their first high C's and they feel like the clarinet's dropping out of their mouth, if they can keep that pressure up and out against the top lip, top teeth, that really will help. They'll be surprised because suddenly the sound will speak. So if you were to go to them and gently, again, always warn them, gently push up on the bell against their, so they feel how much pressure you're talking about. It's a great kind of a tactile visual thing for them to realize, oh, that much, because they don't realize how much they really have to keep that pressure up. And gravity pulls the instrument out. And so then we lose read and then we lose sound, especially as we ascend to the upper register.
And you can most certainly have a student use a neck strap, but it is not a replacement of proper hand finger technique position of holding the instrument. It is not in replacement of that. I will often see, and this is something to watch out for, if you have a student use a neck strap, I will often see them not even having their thumb under the tone hole anymore. And that means they are completely relying on the neck strap, and then the neck strap is pulling down and creating other problems. The neck strap is there just as an additional helpful tool, but not in replacement of proper basic foundation of holding the instrument. So be careful.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Lots of good things there to hopefully help you be aware of the importance of that.
And most certainly, if people, want to, in the chat room or on Facebook, Jessica will put them on the Zoom chat. If you have any questions, feel free to type those in as we continue, okay?
Right. Please do. Yeah. So next, the mysteries of articulation. And this is that's another thing I would think besides breath support, articulation is another one of the huge issues that I see students coming in with when they come to college. And it's tricky because we can't see what's going on. We have to do everything by what we see visually outside happening, motion, and also by the sound that we hear. I will say Diane and I articulate differently. And so I'll tell you what I do, and then Diane, she has gorgeous articulation. I just learned to do a different style of articulation in the beginning. I do tip of tongue approximately. Mine is actually just underneath the tip. Most people play 2 taste buds back from the tip of their reed, studies have shown. I play to the tip top of the reed. All right, and Diane plays at the front tip of the reed, and so she'll talk to you about that. But whichever way you teach and choose to teach, the biggest thing, again, is keeping the tongue placement. First of all, keeping the air, because the tongue should ride on the air, right? Try not to think about articulation as an attack. Try to think about articulation as a release of sound. So we're actually just gently, 2 taste buds touching the reed as we do this. But what's going to happen as we play is the tip of the tongue is going to stay close to the tip of the reed, and it's going to simply come away from it, right? So you're going to keep that. So it's going to be like I'm saying the word dee, 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 dee. And I like the D consonant rather than the T because it's less percussive. Though, of course, articulation has a variety of subtleties. As your students progress, they're going to need to be able to play all different kinds. So we're just kind of talking about the basics of starting, getting them to initiate. I would tell you, don't make them articulate at the very beginning. Let them develop getting a sound, keeping their embouchure still. One of the biggest problems I see with beginners is chewing. And that's motion. When they articulate, they're going to actually let their jaw open instead of having it remain, as Diane showed you earlier, in that stasis. It's going to be in that one place and not moving while they play. Because anytime we change the pressure against the reed, we're going to impact the sound. So holding the voicing, letting them develop a good sound and good breath support, then introduce the tongue. And Diane says so beautifully, articulation is speech on the reed. So, and I'll let her talk more about that. And she has a great article she was pedagogy chair for the International Clarinet Association a little bit back, and she wrote a wonderful article that I'd love to share with my students about articulation being speech on the reed, so she can talk more to that. Diane, what you said with that, why don't you take over and talk about that?
Yeah, so yeah, for me, because I think, well, let me backtrack. When I first started playing clarinet, I was, summer before my fourth grade, and I studied with really great people, but I must have squeaked when I first started, to play. And so I found a way not to squeak. And some people do that by anchor tonguing. I did it by I actually touched the tip of my tongue against the roof of my mouth, as if, saying d d d d d. Okay. I couldn't do it now if you asked me, because I must have angled it in such a way, and it doesn't feel natural. But I have had probably two students in my lifetime who have done that, and they're like, how did you know? And I'm like, well, I did it. I know what to listen for. But it was really easy when I got to college to fix it. All I had to do was change the angle. But it's that idea of, whispering D to stimulate or simulate that tongue movement. That's really, we're not moving the entire tongue in the mouth when we say that. And so again, thinking of whispering D, and yes, I use the upper tip of my tongue, a couple taste buds, to just, and I touch about a quarter of an inch below the tip of the reed. I do not feel the extreme tip, but find whatever for whatever works. And basically, what all we're trying to do is, we don't have to touch the reed very hard to stop the reed from vibrating. Okay. And so thinking of the tongue being light and delicate rather than, something that's really heavy, is very helpful. And again, thinking of the type of speech you want to use on the reed. Sometimes if it's a delicate passage, it's going to be more of a thee. And then if it's a non-staccato, it's going to be a d. If it's going to be a staccato, I'm going to want a consonant ending, deep. Okay, so you could just, with me, let's say thee, d, deep. There you have three different articulation styles right there. And then you do that on the instrument. And you just experiment with different types of speech, and articulation is speech on the reed. It's really as simple as that. And then making sure that it's only the upper tip of the tongue that's moving, not the entire back of the tongue. Do watch out for, people, beginners especially. This will happen if their tongue is very low in the mouth to begin with. Often the tongue will come forward and anchor behind the lower lip, behind the lower teeth. We call that anchor tonguing. And then the middle part of the tongue goes forward and touches the reed. You can hear that they will be actually touching too much of the reed. It'll be kind of thuddy. It won't be as precise. And then the roof of the mouth tonguing, it'll sound pretty good, but again, there won't be that much of as a defined ending to the note, because they're not actually using the tongue on the reed. And then puffing, you will see that happen a lot with that. Okay.
Yeah, students are afraid to articulate, and so they start. And sometimes it's tricky to. I knew a really great clarinet player who got all the way to Florida State until he found out he had to relearn to articulate, Mike Sullivan, because he was puffing the air to articulate, and he made all state band and everything doing it. But it comes to a certain point where you can't puff that fast, so you really do need to make sure they're making contact with the reed. And one of my favorite sayings as a middle school band director was, "If you can say it, you can play it," and I still use that now. That goes for rhythm, and it also goes for articulation. So have them practice saying the articulation. Have them say the passage while they're keeping their embouchure formed. Maybe that's what we call tizzling in band, where they're just blowing air through the instrument, practicing the articulation and keeping it light. So what a difference it makes if they're just aggressively coming at it. And I think a lot of times it's the terminology that we use of saying attack the note. We don't want to attack the note. We're actually coming away and releasing the sound. So if you think about it that way, it's a more gentle kind of impression for the students to get as they start to approach articulation.
And again, here we are, we're saying that light fingers, okay, light tongue movement, light tongue pressure. It does, if the tongue is pointed a little bit, the tongue muscle itself, there's strength in that tongue muscle. If the tongue is kind of flat and spread, you're going to get a lot more contact on the width of the reed. It's not going to be as precise. The student will probably be a little heavier. So again, if that tongue muscle is formed in the right formation to begin with, and you're tonguing on the airstream, not with the airstream, that makes a huge difference. And just economy of motion yep,
So
both fingers and in the tongue.
yeah, and just learn to listen for those kinds of sounds. If you, because you can't see, know what it sounds like when a student's anchor tonguing. You know, have someone demonstrate for you. Call us, we'll do it for you. But just so that you know what it sounds like, since you can't see what the tongue is doing, you've got to go by what you hear. So, all right, shall we move on?
Yes.
Dreaded break. Oh, I promise you the break does not have to be scary. We scare students from the very beginning saying, okay, we're getting ready to cross the break. Are you ready? And then the break is when we cross from third line B flat, right, top of our throat tones, to where we have everything down and add the register key, that long B natural. And so if they're doing this, that does look scary, right? Because they've got a lot of fingers down. But if you've taught them proper hand position and proper air, all those things are going to work. And what makes it even better is if you would please teach them resonance fingerings from the very beginning. I promise you, it's not that they won't even know it's difficult. You can even go in their beginning band books and fill in the tone holes or the keys or tone holes for the resonance fingerings, and they'll learn it that way from the beginning, right? That's an idea. So there are different ideas. Every clarinet's different, but the resonance fingerings that have been proven to be most in tune and resonant for most clarinets, for many clarinets, and Diane will have some variations that she uses too. I'll show you mine first. G, I add 1 and 3 on the bottom. And this is also great in beginning band because now they've got some stability. They're not trying to play that open tone, you know, everything open note. So it makes a good difference, right? The G is the least offensive of the throat tones, but that's the finger you want to use, 1 and 3. And if anybody wants these, I have a handout I can email to you easily. Just send me a message, right? So G sharp, A flat. I'm going to add third finger, first finger. And I don't know if we can hear the difference on this. G. This adds more ping to the sound, right? And then the one for A and B flat. Typically for A, I will use 2-3, 2-3 C key. And if they forget all of them, that's the most important one. Because that A is typically, A and B flat are our worst notes on the instrument, especially the B flat. But that's going to help a lot. And B flat, if it's a soft B flat, I'll use that. But typically I use 3-3 C on the B flat. Now, the big deal when you're crossing the break, if you go from A to B, typically we have this, right? But if you're using resonance fingerings, that's all you're moving. And then it's so much smoother and easier, right? And then they can learn that the break is not scary. We're just simply crossing over into the next register. They get all tense and they start squeezing, they start biting, and their hands get really tight and they leak because they're squeezing so hard because they're afraid. That's what causes that. So get them to learn those from the beginning. Otherwise, we have to teach them that when they come to college. And it's really hard to change that late date. So consider, a lot of band directors will just teach the drop the whole bottom hand. That's better than nothing, but I would say, why not go ahead and teach them the right ones from the beginning? But, you know, hopefully if they're studying privately, if you've got someone who comes in, every clarinet's different. They might have to add more fingers down. They might have to take fingers away. Do what works best for your students and their clarinets. But that's what works for us. All right. Diane, you want to talk about your variations on that?
Yeah, I mean, I use the exact same fingerings, and I would probably not teach this other B flat fingering necessarily to a beginner. But for the more advanced students out there, especially, what my favorite B flat fingering is 2-3 B key on the left, actually.
That's a good
Because, you know, and 3-3 C key is okay, but I just like that one better. It really speaks really well on my instrument, and a lot of instruments. Now, also another really great book to get is Tom Ridenour's Clarinet Fingering book. He has all of these resonance fingerings and more marked down with their characteristics and their ease, and oh, this is the standard one, etc. Plus, he has all 19 high G fingerings. So it's a really great book that band directors should really have, and then you can give that out to students to look at, or copy some fingerings for them. That's really great. Another thing that maybe, as students practice going over the break, is if they're having trouble going from that B, just maybe go back to the basic fundamental, the low E, and have them then, okay, get the fingerings, get the fingers in the right spot, and then they just add that register key. And so they know what it feels like, and then have them go from A to B and not change anything with the fingers. And it's challenging, but it's not hard. They can do it.
A really good thing, if you feel comfortable, if you've got enough clarinet chops to do it, if you have them turn their barrel around where they're blowing the air and you finger the note, you can show them, this is all I'm doing. I'm just popping the register key. That's all I'm doing. And that's kind of an aha moment for them. Then they think, okay, it's not that their clarinet doesn't work, it's that they can do it, right? So, and again, that keeping the fingers really relaxed. And when you're having them practice scales, instead of having them, when they're doing their B flat concert scale, their C to C, let them approach that slowly. Maybe they play the bottom of the scale quickly, and they get to G and they slow down and they go slowly and practice those resonance fingerings. Have them write in their music to cover. We call it covered fingerings, resonance fingerings. But I have my students remind themselves, or I'll mark in their music where they need to begin to cover, just until they develop the habit. Pretty soon, Diane and I don't think about it. We just do it naturally because we've been doing it for a million years. Whew. She just had a birthday yesterday, so one more. She's still younger than me, though. That's okay. But that idea of keeping, building those habits that set them up for success later on. These things that we do, beginning band is so important, and it's so easy to miss these things because you're dealing with so much stuff. And discipline and, crazy, and now Zoom meetings and all these sorts of crazy things. But if you can try to reinforce that and do little playing checks, check them and watch for that relaxation, okay, that will really make a big difference. Nothing should change. You should not see the embouchure change. The air needs to keep blowing, right? And all of that goes, it's just simply we're adding fingers and the register key. So don't scare them about the break. Right? It's just a transition in registers, right?
I would also say, and you're probably not going to have a beginner on bass clarinet, but for those students, that are playing bass clarinet, they need to be taught resonance fingerings too. Yes, they don't have open tone holes like we do. Well, not all, some of them do. So, but it's crucial for bass clarinet too, to do that, because my goodness, it's a huge instrument, and it can be even more difficult. And learning resonance fingerings on those auxiliary instruments and the bass clarinet, are just as important.
Right. Exactly. With that huge key work, crossing over the break is even more of a chore. And two, if you have some of the not great older instruments, the throat tones are wildly sharp on those old bass clarinets. So resonance fingerings can help to get things a little bit more in tune for you as well. But mostly it's going to help with the crossing of the break, the beauty of tone and intonation.
And I'll add one little thing for those band directors. I mean, I know you all use your own method books for the band. But if you're looking for something for your students who maybe aren't studying privately, a really good method book that I think I use this for any beginners, is the Avram Gelper Clarinet Method book. It's in 2 volumes, and the first book literally keeps the student in that Chalumeau register so they develop good finger placement for, I don't know, either 11 lessons or 17. I forget which number, but it's quite a bit before they actually learn to go over the break. And that much time staying in that register using a method book like that, I have found to be really helpful for beginning students. I had an 8th grader who needed to catch up. She just started learning the clarinet. We took her through that summer, and she caught up and superseded everybody who'd been starting since 5th grade because she used that method book. So I just want to put a shout out to, that's a really good supplement for any of your young students.
It is. There's also another good book that's published through Carl Fisher called My First Close, and it teaches the resonance fingerings. They're in the front of the book, and I helped to write it. I made sure they were in there, but it's it's great for students who've had 1 year of band. Just kind of, it takes our famous close book and takes some exercises out of it and slows it way down and makes it a bit able for those students to use. But if you want, it's, an inexpensive side thing just to help work on resonance fingerings, that's great. And I agree with Diane that the Gelper is a fabulous book and strongly encourage that.
I'm going to see if I can find it because somebody wanted to know what it,
Mine's at school.
there it is. Okay, so yeah, it's just called Clarinet Method. Okay, and the second method book is green, just so you know.
Great. Yay. All right.
Okay. Pinkies, right?
Pinkies. This is, this
You
is.
talk about chromatic fingerings. How about if I talk about pinkies? Okay. This is like a pet peeve of mine. This is what I call a bad high school habit when they get to college and I see this happening. And it's because in every method book, we learn, now they do put both fingerings in method books, but they generally show you low E on the left and put your right pinky on the F key. Well, if you're going chromatically, that makes sense, okay? But sometimes, let's say you're playing an E major scale, you are not going to be able to do this and then slide down on your F sharp key and then oops, hop up to the G sharp. So students really need to become familiar that we have two fingerings for B or low E, two fingerings for low F or middle C. Same thing with C sharp. Okay. Some people have, I have a left hand E flat key, D sharp key. Generally, you're only going to have it on the right. And what you want to teach your students is that based on the passage work at hand. Now, definitely if you're going from a B to a C or a C to a B, I certainly don't mind if a student keeps the C key down when they go to the B. That's not a problem, okay? But if they're doing something in a key, let's say they're doing something in G major and they've got arpeggiation, I would not want them to do a G major arpeggio with the B and the C key down. That makes no sense to me, and it's more work. And I'm all about trying to make things easier rather than more difficult. So what you want to teach your students is try to think about where is the movement coming from? And if it's mostly in one hand, put the pinky there. So in other words, G, B, D, G, put the B natural in the right. And it's easy. Take a pencil and put an R or an L over your music. So please teach your student that really important little tip.
One of the biggest things we see is going from C to E flat, right? The third space C, and they will just slide. Can't do it cleanly. They think they can, but they need to use that left hand C going to E flat unless they have most of them, they're not going to have them beginning horns, have a side E flat key. But again, it goes, but those pinkies are so important. Not only are they anchors, but they can make a big difference in the cleanliness of our technique based on what Diane shared with you based on that. A good rule of thumb is to try to keep the motion in one hand whenever possible. So for example, if they're doing an arpeggio and instead of using this, it's going to be clankier and louder, right? Hopefully not clanky, but you want to keep it over on the right so that they're coming in the same hand with the technique. It's just always going to be cleaner. But I'm going to add, my dog just came in. Hello, Marley. Sorry. So if you hear panting, it's her. The next thing that I see besides that cripples students' techniques, they'll come in to do honor band auditions and all state auditions, chromatic fingerings, the not knowing their chromatic fingerings and ending up flip-flopping fingers. So please, 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 that's another thing I have on the same sheet that I have my resonance fingerings. I have the chromatic fingerings. If anyone wants those, I'll be happy to email you that, but just make sure that you're aware. They're typically the second fingering listed for like our B natural or E flat. And for example, many times for some reason, students are getting taught the sliver key E flat, which is chromatic E flat from the beginning, and they end up coming in sliding off. And it's just crippling their technique. They should be using this 99% of the time. This is just for a chromatic passage, and not everybody likes to use it for a chromatic passage. So I know Diane hates that fingering. So, but just making sure that we're teaching those things properly can make a huge difference. So, when you're watching them do their chromatic scale, they always do the proper pattern, so that we end up with smooth, clean technique as they get faster and faster. So those little things, and that's tricky. Again, if you're not a clarinet player, you're not going to know this stuff. So don't ever hesitate to ask. I love when band directors reach out to me, because when I was a band director, I had to ask tons of brass questions and bassoon questions and, all of that, because we can't know everything. So go to somebody. There are lots of great videos out right now. So many of our colleagues have done a beautiful job of putting video content out during the pandemic, which has been super helpful. So you can find information everywhere on these things. You can always write to us. We've got our own set of videos that we're doing, trying to help teachers, but just don't teach them incorrectly. Do your best to, if you don't know, great, find out and then start teaching them, right? Because those things can make a huge difference.
And let me add that this has nothing to do with chromatic, but it has to do with trill keys sometimes. And I remember when I was studying with Robert Marcellus, he was blind at the time, and man, that man's hearing was amazing, and he could tell if you were using a chromatic fingering or a trill fingering for something. And I just this past week, I had to correct a student or two when they were doing their G major Behrman. They'd go up to the high F sharp and they'd use the trill key G for their scale. Now, some people may teach that. For me, I don't like that because it's not in tune. It's not a really good G fingering. We have 18 others. So I would just caution you, and they said that they learned that from their band director at the time. So it's not wrong. If you're trilling from F sharp to G, yes, that's the only fingering you can use. But in a scale, you probably don't want to teach that, because then they actually tried to use that in their arpeggio because that was the G they knew.
And also E flat, D sharp in the altissimo, teaching them that fingering instead of I know it's more difficult to get to this, but please don't teach, this is an awful fingering. It's a bad trill fingering even. So make sure they do the correct one and just they practice to get used to it, as well as adding the pinky key for high D and above in the altissimo. Makes a huge difference in response and intonation, all of that stuff. And it just, do teach them, make them be aware, never on high C sharp, because it makes it like 50 cents sharp. But from high D up, that pinky goes down and stays down for the foreseeable future for them, right?
Yeah, when you get to high A and above, then sometimes we switch to a C sharp key, but
they're not going to play it there in middle school, high school, but then hopefully they're studying with someone, they've learned how to use different pattern once they get above that place, because A is our crossover note kind of. But those little things, my husband always says the devil's in the details, and it's so true, that can really help your students progress much more quickly, be much more successful, which makes your band better, right? All right, we had a great session yesterday with Maury Bakun on care of the instrument, care and feeding of the clarinet. So
on my Facebook page, yeah.
It's up there. You can go back and watch it. And he's also funny and a genius and all of that. So I encourage you to watch that. But we're going to kind of talk about some basics of this too. And so Diane, do you want to talk about swabbing?
Yeah, sure. So, basically you need to swab after you play, and actually while you're playing. Well, while you're practicing, especially if you're dealing with a brand new wooden clarinet, you don't want to go more than 20-25 minutes without swabbing, and not just swabbing through the instrument, and of course not the mouthpiece. We're talking, just having the barrel and the instrument out, and not just swabbing through the clarinet, but actually taking each joint apart and swabbing through and cleaning out wrong joint. Cleaning out in here, okay, with not necessarily your swab, but you can use a Kleenex to do that.
Use your
moisture out of the instrument. And what I like to teach about the left joint, the top joint, is this is where most of your moisture is going to accumulate. And so if you're really wanting to get the spit out, the moisture out, you basically plug up the instrument here, finger a low C, and then you blow into it. And then all of this, anything that's trapped in these tone holes that a swab won't get out will come out. And then you just make sure you wipe very carefully.
Yeah, your pads will last much longer if you do that, for sure. And I just have students keep a package of Kleenex, and we keep some in the studio for them to clean out their tenons. This is sockets where the joints come together, the bell and the lower joint, and then also in the barrel, both ends. You don't want to leave moisture in the clarinet. That's where cracking will happen. So you want to get every time they're done playing, and teach them that with a plastic clarinet too, because they're learning habits for hopefully if they switch over to a nice wooden instrument later on. And still a plastic clarinet needs to be swabbed too. You want to protect your pads. So, everything you can to teach them that. We teach swabbing from the bottom of the instrument up. And Maury made a great point yesterday about swabs that have pulls on both ends. So if it gets stuck, where it typically will get stuck against the register tube that you can see inside the upper joint, don't yank it, don't pull it, because you can pull it out, and that's an expensive repair to make, and just don't do it. But do swab during, and try to avoid chamois swabs. You want something that's going to be either a silk swab or microfiber swab that's not going to leave particles or any fibers behind inside the clarinet. I would also avoid any fuzzy things that you just leave in the clarinet. They're okay to pull through, but they're still not going to be as absorbent. And you don't want to ever leave moisture in the clarinet. That's why I would not do that. So those are super important things to do.
And then also, don't put the swab. Maury talked about this yesterday. You know how some people will do this.
Yeah.
And then they'll throw that under their bell. There's a lot of moisture in this once you swab it out. So I actually just keep it out of my case. You don't want that laying on your instrument inside the case.
And wash it regularly.
Yeah. But not more than one swab at a time. I did that before, and it was like a reverse origami.
Yeah, don't do that. And if you have a washing machine with an agitator, make sure you put it in like a lingerie bag so you don't get it wrapped around. Just be careful, or hand wash. But it's super important to keep it clean. We see some scary things. Those things will grow things. So you want to, that's going through your instrument, then you're breathing that in. So you want to keep it clean. I would suggest students have a couple of swabs if they can, so they can rotate them. But we have them everywhere, Diane and I know. So, all right, wiping off the cork joints. And after putting cork grease on for years and years and years, you'll notice that the cork starts to change color, gets dark in color. It's a really simple way to clean it is just get eye makeup removers, get those cloths, and then periodically clean off all the cork grease. Never use your swab to clean those parts, because then you're actually pulling cork grease and other stuff through your clarinet when you swab, and that's a recipe for disaster. So be really careful with that. And Diane and I both, we don't swab mouthpieces. There are people who do. If you do, that's great. The problem is the weight. The weight going through, you've got to be very, very careful with the inside of the mouthpiece. It's not the same material as a clarinet, all right? So it's much more fragile, and it makes a huge difference at the air, what happens to the air. Like even a little scratch in your mouthpiece can ruin the mouthpiece for you. So teach students to clean it regularly. I use lemon juice. Just put it in a little shot glass or something small. Don't get the cork wet, just about halfway up. And then I use Q-tips inside. And they should be regularly doing that.
Lemon with water.
Pardon?
Lemon juice with water, not straight lemon juice.
I use straight lemon juice, but it is diluted. Yeah, it's diluted from.
Diluted. Yes. Okay.
Store. Yeah. So, and just I leave it like 45 seconds, and then take it out. Be very careful. It's easy to drop. So make sure your students are doing it over a place where they're not going to drop it on a kitchen floor, and it shatters. They'll break very easily. But you'll notice sometimes mouthpieces will develop white calcium deposits and stuff. There's nothing wrong with the student. It just, some people will produce more of that than others, but that lemon juice will help to get rid of it, right? Especially now, we want to be super careful about keeping mouthpieces clean, keep your reed cases clean. They can wash their reeds, just everything they can do to keep safe and, not spread things to each other, hopefully.
And as far as the tone holes, the tone holes can get dirt and, accumulation. And, you can use Q-tips for that. And Maury Bakun yesterday talked about getting eyelash brushes. And I actually went on Amazon last night, and I got a packet of 100 coming to me, and it was like $5. And so you can use that because they're really gentle, of course, and you can use that to clean the tone holes, and then you don't have maybe something from the Q-tip getting into the instrument. So I thought that was a really great tip that he shared with us yesterday.
He talked about holding the instrument this way so that it drops out of the clarinet with gravity rather than going into the instrument. So
Yeah. Someone said, how often is regularly? Once a week, once a month? I'm assuming they're talking about the mouthpiece.
yeah,
I,
I
I personally clean off my mouthpiece after, I mean, I don't do the lemon juice thing, but I will clean off any excessive stuff, lip stuff, stuff that accumulates, on the top. I will just gently remove that so it doesn't accumulate. But in terms of the mouthpiece cleaning, how often do you do? I mean,
once a week, like once a week, sometimes 2 weeks, but because I clean mine every day, like you do too. And I use a tissue to go up, or the bottom of my swab to go up and get the moisture out of it.
yeah, I think you just just take a look at it. I have seen some student and some professionals mouthpieces with calcium deposits galore, and once the calcium deposit actually goes on the table, the flat side of the mouthpiece where the reed hits, all bets are off. The mouthpiece is not going to play, so you need to be really careful about that.
Yeah. Oof. And dusting the keys, especially folks who are dealing with marching band horns. Sometimes our marching band horns have to be our concert band horns. That's just the reality for a lot of students. So trying to get them to regularly clean, especially during marching season, will help keep the horn in good working order. But dusting the keys, a lot of times key work, dust will build up within the keys. And if you get just a really soft makeup brush, you can just blow on the instrument and gently watching out for springs and pads. Don't let them, you never want to have them touch pads. Be very careful with that, but just really lightly going around and blowing will help. And wiping down the instrument every time they're done playing. Just find a soft cloth to wipe down, because the oils from their hands or the acids from their hands will over time impact the instrument and the keys and everything. So you'll see some students are key eaters. Their keys will turn green and all sorts of things. Again, that's just body chemistry. But if they do a better job at wiping down the instrument, then that will help to keep it looking beautiful longer and playing better.
Well, we've got 5 minutes left, so I think we need to wrap up. Does anybody out there have any particular questions that we maybe haven't covered?
We really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, this has been fun, and we both have, you can reach out to both of us if you need any more information, or Q-tips are okay. I was taught they leave fibers. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to just be careful. I mean, and I think some Q-tip brands are more fibrous than, I mean, like the nondescript Q-tip, the non
Name brand.
Q-tip, yeah. So I think you just have, that's why Maury was saying using the eyelash brushes would be really great for the tone holes.
Yeah, and make sure it's an eyelash brush, which is meant to be near eyes and very soft. You want to avoid mouthpiece brushes. Sometimes I get really scared when I see these kits that come with beginning clarinets. Don't use the bore oil. Don't use the, valve oil type cork grease. Don't use anything that looks like it's meant to go into a brass mouthpiece. Yeah, please. Those things can just damage your instrument terribly.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? And remember, you can always email us at theamicitiaduo.gmail.com, or on our Facebook page. And you can email either of us as well. Happy to help. I saw that a couple people asked for me to send the resonance fingerings, chromatic fingerings to you. So I'll get that off to you as soon as I'm at my school computer. Be glad to do that.
And again, get that Tom Ridenour clarinet fingerings book. I mean, everything that we're telling you is in there. It's maybe not our favorites, because he's got every possibility in there. But what I also like about that book is if you're working on the Poulenc sonata, he'll have a fingering for a high F sharp in the second movement. And yeah, Jessica just put
Great.
where you can get that book. It's a tremendously wonderful book. All 19 high G fingerings are in there.
Yeah, he talks specifically about the pitch tendency of it, the timbre of it, everything. So it's a great resource to have.
Every clarinet should own it.
Yeah.
Please talk about when to use resonance fingerings or right hand down and how it's not necessary during technical passages.
I use them during technical passages too because of the connection.
I do too. And again, once you learn it, it's natural, I may sometimes, only use 2-3 in the left hand or something like that, but I use some semblance of a resonance fingering in technical passages.
Yeah, it's the connection. That's what's important there. You're not going to hear the difference in tone, but you're going to hear the smoothness and technique if you use them.
And a really good book I've been using with my students to incorporate really making sure they're learning those resonance fingerings is the Intermediate Clarinet Studies book by Kalman Opperman, because it's unlike his velocity studies where he wants you to try to go from 0 to 180. He actually wants you to play through these really legato and concentrating on the technique. And I think that's a really great book to learn how to incorporate these resonance fingerings. So as you get faster, it's just a matter of how you play.
Right. Good.
Well, thank you everybody. Again, we're available for more questions in those various ways to reach us. The Amicitia@gmail.com. Sorry, the Amicitia Duo at gmail.com, or on our Amicitia Duo page, or our individual, emails. So you can Google us and figure out how to reach us. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope you join us this afternoon. We have 2 more great sessions this afternoon, and we can't wait to talk with the panelists. So thank you all so very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.